Welcome to Hub-Bub, the People's Podcast, where we engage our citizens and investors with the activities of the Planning and Code Administration and encourage everyone to contribute to Hagerstown's growth.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Hub-Bub Podcast, number 8 already.
Unbelievable. They kept us around this long.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And it's been going well, I think. What do you think?
I agree. Getting a lot of good feedback out there. I'm having people say that they're seeing us out in the public when they're watching TV. They come across our podcast, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think so too. It's been really, really good that we've been doing this. So, Donnie Harcum.
Sean Brown.
It's nice to work with you.
It's good to see you again.
Yeah, right back at you, buddy. So, our podcast this month. When I thought about this podcast, I was thinking about how people, they may not relate to the topic, they may think that, but pretty much every day, everybody is going to be able to relate to this in a sense. Now, it's exciting to me because I've been doing this for a while, and I enjoy doing this aspect of zoning in the past. But the thing is that everything you see, you and I and everybody sees when you're driving down the road when it comes to development, it has to do with the site plan.
Yeah, we're affected by it every single day. Pretty much every building or structure we are in, we're affected by it. So it is, like you said, a lot of people probably don't think, how does this relate to me? Well, it does every single day. And that's what I'm excited about, is because this is a great educational opportunity for everybody to learn what is a site plan.
Absolutely. So you're driving down the road and you see existing development, you see shopping centers, you may see something in the middle of a development, in the middle of being built, and you're wondering, or maybe you're not, wondering, how is this happening? Is it just haphazard? What kind of control is it? Well, it all goes back to a site plan. So whenever you see development going on, there is a site plan that is governing that growth. So again, this may not be the most exciting topic for people to really talk about, but it is very informative, and it will help give you who maybe have wondered what happens when growth is going on in development, what goes into it, and then you kind of have a better understanding, because sometimes you can see something go in and develop really quickly, and then sometimes it seems like a project can last for months. Well, there's just so many variables there that can cause that. So when we talk about a site plan, what exactly are we talking about? Well, we're talking about excluding residential development. We're talking about basically a bird's eye view of a parcel of land and what is proposed to happen on that land. So not the building itself, but what is going on around that, whether it be parking, landscaping, how that land is going to be used, the parking. There's so many things that go on there. And we might add, just as we do in the beginning of our podcast, that we're talking about a lot of different regulations. Some of these things that we're talking about today are specific to Hagerstown, but in many cases will have to be very general because they can vary from locality to locality. But just about any urban area is going to have site plan requirements, and it's needed to control the growth. So there can be minor and major site plans, which I think we're going to talk about in a little bit. But basically, a site plan, when there's pretty much any type of commercial development, it's going to basically show what is going to go on that piece of property. Again, landscaping, parking, BMP ponds, open space, lighting, you name it. Everything that is going to be a feature on that land outside of the building is going to be reflected on that site plan. So gives us something to go on. So here's an example of a cover page of a site plan. Now, you may not be able to make out everything that's on it. It's pretty busy, but it just gives you an idea of what goes into a site plan with all the parking requirements, landscaping, infrastructure, setbacks, lighting, a whole host of things that have to be reviewed and finally approved. This example is a streetscape plan, and this is what's proposed. So what local jurisdictions have the ability to do is look at something before it's actually built and see what it's going to look like. That way they can see if it's going to be compatible with colors and so forth, and That way they know what's going to be built before somebody invests a lot of time and money and before it's approved.
Yeah, and like you said, I don't know that a lot of people proactively think about these types of things, but after it's explained to them, it's like, oh wow, there's a reason for that. This amount of bushes, this amount of shrubbery around the property, or how many lights they need, which is something we're going to talk about later on in the episode. So you might be wondering, is a site plan like a floor plan? Well, a floor plan is a scale diagram concerning the arrangement of rooms in a structure. A site plan focuses on everything within the property lines itself. Floor plans typically do not include site plans unless the property is expected to undergo proposed changes with significant alterations. To put it simply, a floor plan is what's going on the inside of a building, and a site plan will show everything on the property and just an outline of where the building is on the parcel. So what is the purpose of a site plan? Site plans are intended to show how the intended land use relates to the features of a parcel and its surrounding area. Multiple agencies will review a site plan to assure that the proposed development meets the standards for the area. And this includes, make sure they have public facilities such as roads, schools, water, emergency services, and sewage disposal. Because if those things are not correct, I can't imagine what would happen with a wrong sewage disposal issue. It'd be a stinky issue. The zoning administrator will ensure the zoning codes for the district that the development is located in, make sure they are met. Site plan review process is designed to protect landowners, and it is in their best interest to comply with this procedure. And the development that is in full compliance with the zoning code has the best insurance against any land use lawsuits and complaints that come in the future. And furthermore, a development that is not in compliance with the zoning code is unlikely to be granted any further development permits until it is brought into compliance. So making sure you go through the proper site plan process is very important. And during this review, plans examiners and the Planning Commission will be looking at the landscaping, like I said, the lighting, tree removal, driveway locations, building locations, utility locations, and other items that will determine how the property will appear once it's constructed. Lighting is one of those topics reviewed to ensure the neighbors that the light lumens will not filter into the neighboring properties. There is a page of the site plan that explicitly dedicated to the lumens or the lux from the lights themselves. So again, something you don't really think about, like why do they have this many lights? Well, there's a reason. Make sure there's not light pollution going into the neighbors' yards.
Yeah, I can't emphasize enough what you alluded to earlier about how it's really important for property owners and developers to stick what's been proposed. What I've seen happen over the years is maybe somewhere along the line, years later after they've developed, they make changes. And then what happens sometimes is you come back and the city's looking into it and found out there's been changes, and sometimes they're in compliance, but sometimes they're not, and then they're gonna have to bring them into compliance. So it's important for developers to realize, and it's not necessarily always intentional because they're trying to improve something, but if you're gonna make changes to the site, it's a good idea to just touch base with the planning department. Hey, is this something I need to amend the site plan for this change, especially things like lighting and so forth. So, but that includes things like parking too. Parking's a huge issue. Because it's not uncommon for localities, and we talked about this in an earlier episode about the land use management code. That's our zoning ordinance, and that's basically the manual for which site plans are developed from. So in the case of Hagerstown, as with many localities, you've got your zoning ordinance, and that's what an engineer or architect is going to refer to so that he develops the site plan in accordance with what the zoning ordinance requires. And one of those things includes is things like parking. So, for example, you see these large shopping centers and they have a lot of parking.
Right.
Well, there's certain requirements. They have to have so many spaces depending on the type of use. Okay. Even the ADA requirements, the number of handicapped parking spaces and just arbitrary typically.
They don't just throw them in there for the heck of it?
No. Oftentimes the ADA dictates that if for every so many parking spaces, you have to have this many handicapped spaces.
Okay.
So it just all depends on the locality. And then signage too. depending on the zoning district and the number of, say, if it's a strip mall or a shopping center or just a freestanding store, the signage requirements may be different. So it's important to look at those, and that's a huge part of the approval process.
Okay.
That's part of a site plan. It can be, but it's really a separate application, so to speak, that zoning is going to look at, the planning is going to look at to make sure that those freestanding signs, building-mounted signs, sometimes they allow for variances because you do have unique situations where maybe it's just not enough signage realistically in a real-world environment. So, they can be explored in relaxing those regulations, but you have to follow the process. And then the uses too. You're driving down the street, and we've talked about this in the past, but oftentimes groups of uses or similar uses are in one area. So you go down a road and it's shopping centers. Well, that's because the zoning in that area has dictated that the uses have to be similar, like shopping centers, retail stores. So that's one thing that a locality is looking at as well. So it's important for, and I see this happen, or I've seen it happen in the past, where well-intentions, not so much with big developers, but smaller businesses, maybe they're not familiar with the whole process. They'll move in and then come to find out their use isn't even permitted. And that just creates a lot of problems that nobody really wants. So it's important that when anybody's going to start a business, large or small, check with the locality, make sure that your actual use is going to be permitted in that area. I was thinking about this too, another area. Sometimes, maybe you've seen this, you'll see, and it can be any type of use, schools or shopping centers, but you see this large pond off to the side. Why do they need a pond? Nobody's doing fishing. No. But so actually those can serve two purposes. They're basically to manage stormwater runoff. So you got a shopping center and you've got a large store like a Walmart. They've created this huge parking area. Well, now you've created an area where now the water can't be absorbed when it rains. Okay. Well, it's got to go somewhere. Sure. Well, you don't want to flood the streets. So oftentimes to manage that water, that runoff, they'll have these BMP ponds through the water. And then that also helps to filter it because, with all the cars and the oil, if the water were just to run off in the storm sewers, that's a lot of contamination. Right. So those ponds really help to filter the water, get it cleaner when it goes back in to the waterways. So a lot of things to think about. Trees even. I've seen this happen in the past, and it only typically applies in some areas, but it's just a good idea to understand that sometimes it's not just okay to remove trees. Sometimes there's protected species. Sometimes it's an area where they're actually protected for one reason or another. So it's a good idea before developing land and just starting to clear that you check the local ordinance, check with your planning office to see, hey, is it okay for me to remove these trees? And it may be okay, and just remove the trees and you're good, but they may ask for some alternatives because there may be a reason that the trees are there. So they may say, yeah, you can remove the trees, but we need you to put something back as an alternative to take the place of the trees that's been lost. So these are just a few examples.
Right, you can probably go on and on.
Oh, yeah, don't get me going.
All right, so that's some great information. And so what if I want to develop some land? When should I apply? And like you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, each jurisdiction is different, so always check with your local jurisdiction when you should apply for a site plan. But in Hagerstown, we have 3 criteria levels to determine when and what type of site plan would be required. So if your project is disturbing less than 500 square feet, generally the building permit application will address the site review in this process. However, a minor site plan may be required if the complexity of the project warrants a more detailed review. When a development is disrupting between 500 and 5,000 square feet, a minor site plan application would need to be submitted. Generally, a development project less than 5,000 square feet does not require a review by the Planning Commission. And finally, a project disturbing land greater than 5,000 square feet is required to have a full site plan. This plan will require a review from the Planning Commission. So it's good to know those 3 criteria levels for minor and major site plans. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you mentioned Planning Commission. That's just kind of one aspect of the whole review process. And I might add, too, that it's not unusual for a lot of areas to have these steps in the process. And what anybody can do, and this is true with the city of Hagerstown, a lot of localities have this in place where if you want to develop something, but you're not sure exactly what the process is, or you may not know everything that's involved, oftentimes there's forums for that. You can come down and you can talk to all the departments that are involved and get the input saying, listen, if I develop this, this is what's going to be required of me. So you kind of go in with knowing everything that you're going to have to go through. So, after you've gone through the application process, now as you mentioned, you have the Planning Commission, and this is really just a committee that's made up of 5 or more individuals. It's part of the ordinance. This is part of the process that's been mandated by the elected officials, that they have the opportunity to review any development applications. And so this can be made up of people of all kinds of backgrounds. Typically, they don't have a lot of experience in everything, but they may have experience in some areas. But collectively, they're able to kind of look at things and see how they're going to fit in with the surroundings. And they do serve at the pleasure of the elected body. So that's something to keep in mind. And some may not create a planning commission. Maybe it's just not needed or practical. So that elected body, the city council, the board, or whatever, can just review that by themselves. Now, earlier we talked about how there's kind of long-term planning, and so that's where the Planning Commission comes into play as well. They're going to help ensure basically growth happens in an orderly and efficient manner in line with the comprehensive plan. We won't go into that a lot, but basically when you think about that word comprehensive, complete. And so basically they're going to make sure that things that happen in the future are going to be in line with that plan, the plan that the city of Hagerstown has for growth in the future, again, like other jurisdictions. So they're going to review site plans, they're going to review subdivision proposals within the city, like here, Hagerstown, and then they're going to make recommendations one way or another to mayor and city council. And that can cover not only just site plans, but things like rezoning requests. Sometimes you'll have a piece of property that's zoned one thing, and if it's compatible, the city council may in the end approve it to be zoned something differently, as long as it's not too disruptive and it meets certain requirements. Ordinance amendments, meaning changes sometimes that need to happen to keep up with growth. We've talked about that in the past. And then as the city continues to grow, comprehensive plan updates. So we talked about this, I think it was in our first episode. It's like a family.
Yes.
Yeah.
Always growing.
Yeah. So how many times since your son's been born have you changed your game plan?
Too many to count.
Right. Yeah. So it's the same with the city. You can plan for growth, and that's the way you go in that direction. But then with technology and a lot of things, outward influences, now you have to change your approach and come up with a different plan. So
I'm going to have to talk to my wife about a comprehensive plan for our son.
Yeah, let me know how that goes. Yeah, but we'll talk about that in future episodes. The comprehensive plan, we mentioned in the past, Vision Hagerstown 2035. That's part of that, and we'll explore that. That's pretty interesting stuff.
It is very comprehensive. So, all right. So now that I know why a site plan is required and who will review it, what do I do next? So now it is time to make application to your local jurisdiction. The application is accompanied by a plot plan. And so how do I get a plot plan of my property? A lot of citizens believe that local governments have plot plans of their property already, but that's not always the case. The possibility exists better for a commercial property more than residential property, and that the plot plan would only exist if a previous owner made a site plan application. So if somebody has already done this before, there is a possibility that we do have the plot plan, but it's not always the case. Sometimes local land records offices may have a plot plan or survey of the property. If that is not the case, then the owner or developer will need to hire an engineer or surveyor. These are professionals that are licensed to produce site plans for development to be constructed. And each jurisdiction is different. Local government may allow a homeowner to produce their own plan. As always, please check with your local jurisdiction on these requirements. We are providing an understanding of the process, not what is approved or allowed in your local jurisdiction. And in order to assist with the application process, some jurisdictions, like Hagerstown, have created detailed checklists for applicants to follow, ensuring the plans are covering the items needed to obtain approval from the Planning Commission. So we're giving you all the tools that you will need for a smooth process, from the Planning Commission to the checklist. You should be set up pretty good.
Yeah. Understandably, because these things, what we're talking about, cost a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And this, you haven't even done anything yet to the property. You've already, these developers and things, they've already spent a lot of money with engineers and architects. And so, but especially when it comes down to local, smaller operations, sometimes they think, well, do I need to really do this in depth and spend this kind of money? Well, yeah, because a lot of these things they wouldn't know about,
right,
unless they did a site plan. And so it's good to know, and things that need to be to scale. So it's a good investment that's going to help down the road. So once the application is made, again, we have the Planning Commission. They're going to review that to make sure it's in line with the proposed plan and development. And then it's also going to be put out to other agencies, because there are other departments that are interested, like you mentioned in the outset, Public Works, Fire Marshal, Health Department. All of these different agencies have an interest, mm-hmm, so that everything goes well. And then once those things have been reviewed and approved, then they can be signed off on. And it's not always a smooth process, admittedly. Humans sometimes miss things, and there's a back and forth with the process and commenting, so forth. So there can be multiple revisions and changes. And we understand that can be frustrating, especially with the developer or an owner, because he's trying to get things going, and it seems like things are getting bogged down in the review process. But what developers and builders have to recognize is that just missing one thing can be a major hiccup, and eventually maybe even cost more money and time down the road. So it's important to try to get those things right. That's the intent, to do that. And that's why it kind of goes back to what I just mentioned, because as a locality, we don't know everything about everything. That's why we rely on local engineers and architects. They're the ones that are familiar with the ins and outs of certain things, especially technical thing. They're going to be the ones that have already reviewed the local ordinances that we have, and by having them involved, that's going to greatly reduce a lot of downtime and revisions and changes. So that's going to result in comments and things when it comes to site plan approvals and things like that. And sometimes people wonder, like we've had this happen, where somebody's driving through the parking lot and they wonder, for example, why is the driveway here? You ever driven to the back of the parking lot, to the street, and there's no driveway, and you're thinking, why isn't there a driveway here? Mm-hmm. And you end up driving all the way back to the front. Well, there's reasons for that. It's not convenient to get out of the parking lot, it seems, but there's done for a reason, because it creates more traffic issues. And so there's reasons for that, for traffic flow. Line of sight, sometimes line of sight is an issue. It's inherent with a lot of localities where you pull up to a stop sign, even in a parking lot of a shop center, and it's hard to see because of landscaping. Well, there's landscaping requirements, but at the same time, those owners are kind of tasked with managing that and keeping it, So maybe it wasn't an issue when it was put in, but now it is, because they haven't maintained the landscaping and so forth.
Right, it's been 10 years later and those bushes have grown significantly, so it does happen quite a bit.
Yeah. So you may think that weren't required or that's a violation, but actually landscaping is very much a part for a number of reasons for site plans. So it's important for owners to continue to monitor, however you do that with your management companies, to make sure that things are staying on the up and up. But it is impossible for a department to visit every site plan approved in a jurisdiction, because there's just so much going on. There's so much that would be required if we tried to do that. So if you do see something that's an issue, certainly call our office and we can look into it. With these types of things, if something's not working right, we think that maybe something along the lines of the way a business is operating, let us know. Share your concern with us, and we'll look into that. We'll look into the conditions and then investigate it. And if there's changes that need to be made, we'll address that with the owners.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, thanks for all that great information, Sean. That's a lot to take in, but a lot of good information. And if you have any questions regarding any of this information, reach out to us on our social media pages. You can find our department pages by searching for PCAD on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can find the Hub-Bub Podcast pages on Facebook and Instagram as well. And if you prefer to see our faces, if you're just listening to us, we are on YouTube. You can give us a search on YouTube for the Hub-Bub Podcast. But if you prefer audio only, which wouldn't blame them, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, and most all other major podcast platforms. If you need help finding us, we do put the links to all of our pages in the description of the podcast. All right, so now my favorite part of the podcast, our weird news story. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this one, the title of the story is Florida Neighborhood Disturbed by Colorful Paint Job on $500,000 Home. All right, so this is a Florida home. Like I said, I'll put the link to this article in the description of the podcast so you can see a picture of this home. But look at it as like a tie-dye paint job on a $500,000 home. So obviously citizens, neighbors, they're very upset with what their neighbor did to their home. It does not look pretty. I mean, I guess it depends on who's looking at it. But it sounds like they're going to have some issues from their homeowners association. And the code enforcement officials have said that they already had prior violations at this property. So it sounds like it's a problem property, a frequent flyer, as we like to call them, that always pop up on the radar. And our department receives concerns about how properties are painted sometimes, and our jurisdiction does not have any oversight on how a property is painted unless it is in a historic district. Any exterior change in a historic district in the city of Hagerstown is to be reviewed and approved by the Historic District Commission, or the HDC is what we like to call them. Now, this does not always occur because painting does not require a building permit. The paint color of a house that does not comply with the local historic codes is a complaint-driven enforcement item. So kind of like what Sean said before, if you see issues out there, give our office a call and we will investigate it further.
Yeah, that just emphasizes a point that I was thinking about, that with homeowners associations in connection with our department, there can be overlap with those, but with these homeowners associations, they can have their own regulations. We don't have anything to do with them. But kind of in the interest of educating people is that city codes do trump homeowners association codes. So a homeowners association could be more lenient, mm-hmm. But if a city code says you can or cannot do that, that trumps, so to speak. But we don't enforce homeowners associations, and so you can have a homeowners association that are more restrictive. That's fine.
Right.
We're not going to weigh in on that. So, but sometimes that's difficult to navigate for people.
Yeah, because sometimes we run into the issue where something may not be pretty, but it doesn't go against any specific regulation or code. It might not be in violation, but a homeowners association might find an issue with that.
Yeah, we don't regulate pretty.
No, we don't.
Yeah. All right. Well, good job. That is an interesting story. I like that. And again, look at that house. It's something else. All right. So next month's episode, an interesting one. Mm-hmm. I mean, it can be a controversial one, so to speak. You have winners and losers for sure.
Yes, you do. But it's good. It's educational as to why. We give you the reason why.
Yeah. So next month, look forward to the topic of grass and weeds. Yeah. A lot of questions. We get a lot of questions on that. And again, we're going to really hopefully explain that, how it works, the whys. Sometimes we know why things or what's happening, but we don't understand always why. Mm-hmm. So we hope to lay that out in the interest of transparency so that everybody understands what we're doing as a locality. All right. Something to look forward to is March 7th and 8th is the Washington County Annual Home Show. That's something to look forward to. It's going to be held at the Hagerstown Community College and the Athletic Recreational Community Center. And that's put on by the Home Builders Association of Washington County. You can find their website, hbawc.org, and all the information is there. But we bring that up not only because there's going to be a slew of vendors there with all types of building backgrounds and resources and networking, but we're going to have a spot there.
We will be there.
So you get a chance to see Donnie.
Or Sean.
Yeah, all right. So we look forward to seeing everybody who can be there. We'll be there to answer questions, much like we've been doing with our podcasts and a wealth of other information that's going on in the city. So look forward to seeing everybody there.
You better get your signature ready for all the autographs.
Yeah, no glossies of me. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our podcast, which, of course, featuring our musical guest.
This one's going to be good.
Yeah. The name of the group is Staph Infection. Not STAPH, not the infectious disease.
All right.
Although they say they're contagious. That's not me. They said they're contagious.
That's just to the ears, I think.
Yeah, I guess so. The group, Jason Anchorman, Rob Hovermail, Matt Moriello, Dwayne McName, Andy Wallace, and Scott Woods make up the group Staph Infection. And so they play a lot of cover music from the 60s all the way through today. If you ever get a chance to take a look at their videos, they're on Facebook, of course, and YouTube. Quite a party crowd. So call Matt up for your event. Again, go to their Facebook page. You can look them up. You can see their upcoming events. For example, February 29th, they're going to be at the Taste of Vegas Casino Night at the Maryland Theater.
Oh, cool.
March 14th at the John Allison House in Greencastle, PA. So again, check them out. Pretty lively group. You can book them for your events. So yeah, so look forward to seeing them as well. So as we take out our Hub-Bub Podcast, again, thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you next time.